Okay, so this is the stress workshop that we're doing across all regions. Myself, Mark Holt, working with Steve Jones, and obviously Tony Dunbar as well. So we're just going to talk you through the slides, really, which is a set of slides. It's based around talking toolkits and intervention, and obviously the fact that prevention comes via intervention and talking about around mental health. And we'll explain little things about stress risk assessments, how they can be applied far more easily than people realise. And during the process as well, we'll give examples of how it's been applied and success stories. And at the end, myself and Mark Holt will take us through the first few slides, and then Tony Dunbar, who's one of our colleagues from Speak Delivery Office, he'll come on and talk about how the Talking Toolkit helped him and his journey. And then I think there'll be questions at the end. So in terms of slide one, really, that's just an impact slide around the fact that this is about preventing work-related stress, this presentation. It's around stress risk assessments and talking toolkits. And it is around a theory that intervention comes through talking. You know, it's massively important. These talking toolkits have become a real go-to tool for us over the last 4 or 5 years. So the first slide is really just an image slide. So if you go on to the second slide, Karen and Mark will go from there and we'll get into the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Karen, and welcome, everyone. I just want to touch a little bit here around the statistics when we're talking about absence due to mental health. And these statistics on the slide were from 2019, 2020, which, you know, when you look at the statistics on here now, you know, we're quite worrying. Post-pandemic, you know, we can only assume that, you know, more and more of our members are going to be struggling with the mental health. So across Great Britain at the moment, work-related stress accounts for over 51% of all working days lost to ill health. In the last 12 months, over 800,000 workers reported suffering from stress, depression or anxiety caused or made worse by work. And I think that is the point, caused or made worse by work. So you look at that, you know, they're frightening, to be quite honest. 51% there of workers across Britain losing, you know, days at work due to ill health related to mental health. And like I said, you know, post-pandemic, everything is already looking now at those figures rising. And ultimately, what we're going to talk about today, we have evidence in the Northwest region where this works, and this keeps people in work, but it supports our members so much in work, and there is huge benefits towards a stress risk assessment, which is a very simple risk assessment to do. So we're going to talk through that today, and you know, I can't stress too much. There is no silly questions on this, so please ask questions at the end. But it is, you know, it's a simple process where we're really encouraging open and honest conversations around mental health. So I'll pass over to Jamie now for the next slide, please, Karen.
Okay, so this is just some of the examples of stress and how it affects us, examples of stress on the body. You know, it does affect everyone in different ways, you know, and it can lead to people feeling physically unwell. You know, people get involved in something called a stress cycle, and we've got to try and get people out of that stress cycle. You can see on the screen there some of the examples of that: headaches, you know, difficulty sleeping, you know, high blood pressure, heartburn, you know, stomach ache. You know, lots of people who suffer with likes of IBS and Crohn's type illnesses. Stress makes it so much worse for them. So when we control stress, we control the effects of stress too. Just a little note on that: the very first guided conversation I ever done, or you know, the Talking Toolkit as it's called, the very first stress risk assessment was done for a colleague of mine who was having stress headaches. He actually came off. He was a driver, came off the driving because of his stress headaches, and I got involved because the manager at the time was just mostly concerned with getting this guy back onto the driving because he needed a driver. And you know, I said, okay, well, let's try this new guided conversation, this new Talking Toolkit, because he's identified the stress headaches. We'll go in there and we'll speak to this guy. For me, the very first one I did, it was like a light bulb moment, because when we started talking about this person's stress and going through the Talking Toolkit process, we found out so much more going on with this particular guy. he's long left the business now, but at the time, his stress, headaches, there was debt problems and gambling problems, and the stress was just enormous for the poor guy. We ended up using the guided conversation and supporting him with an action plan, and we ended up signposting him to local organisations like the Beacon in Liverpool, who supported him. But just by having that conversation, we went through the process, and we'll talk about the process in strict order in a minute. But just by talking through the process, it was amazing what we learned by sitting there and taking time to follow a process and listen to someone. It is a stress risk assessment that we do when we talk about the stress risk assessment, but it's probably one of the easiest risk assessments anyone can ever do. And we'll elaborate that as we go on through the presentation. But basically, that is an image really of how stress can affect us in so many different ways. So I'll pass you back to Mark for slide 4 now, please, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So this slide touched on the employer's legal responsibilities to minimise stress in the workplace. Now, myself and Jamie are health and safety reps, and we could talk about regulations and legislation all day. I won't bore you with that this evening, but ultimately, our employers do have a legal responsibility under the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations to ensure the health, safety and welfare of all their employees. Minimising stress in the workplace is vital, and it is just as important as any other risk assessment which takes place in your workplace. We have fire risk assessments, we have yard risk assessments, we have COVID risk assessments at the moment, which are usually long and laborious, quite, take a lot of time to go through. The stress risk assessment, like Jamie's touched on, is probably one of the most simple to do, but it doesn't just have to be a manager who can do it ultimately. It could be a health and safety rep, it can be a mental health first aider, but top and bottom bit, to really push the employer, to do this, we have got the backing of the legislation there to make sure, we can really push them to start minimising stress in the workplace and also addressing it. Let's have a conversation around it, because it does exist, and it exists in every single workplace. So the legislation is there to support us, but ultimately, I would hope we are creating a culture now where we shouldn't have to use the legislation. We should be able to have an open and honest conversation with our employers around minimising stress in the workplace. Next slide, please, Karen, for Jamie.
Thanks, Mark. So this is just like identifying, when mental health becomes a disability, and a lot of the occasions that where we identify mental health as a disability is through our mental health first aiders, or our mental health champions, or our health and safety reps or IR reps, where they're having these conversations in the workplace. That is why the conversation is so important, because we can identify people who are potentially covered and protected in law as well. We're quite lucky in the Northwest region because of the amount of mental health first aiders. We have the ambassadors, the champions. We have good people in our area. I mean, I think the buzzword, and I've spoken to Steve Jones about this, the buzzword that gets used is emotional intelligence. But all that is really is just goodness. It's people who are able to relate. They're able to share feelings. They can problem solve. They can empathise with people, and they're motivated to support people. And we have that in abundance in our region. And that's why these guided conversations, actually, we shouldn't be holding back. We should be doing more. Our numbers are really good, but we've got the potential to do so much more and reach out to people. But that key definition there in terms of disability, there's also something that we need to make clear as well. We can also write to the employer and identify, if our colleagues have a long-term health condition, and we can also request disability recognition for them by writing to the employer. We may not have to wait for, GP reports or OH reports. We can make that first step and raise awareness on disability to the employer for people who may not be known as covered under the Equality Act. But that really, the long-term effect on day-to-day activities, it covers both physical health disability and also mental health disability as defined under the Equality Act. Really good piece of legislation for us as trade unionists. So next slide for Mark, please, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And this slide just builds on what Jamie spoke about there. So it's just, defining the Equality Act there for us. because it is there to protect our members from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society. And I think Jamie really hit the nail on the head there, where, we've made some great gains in the fact that, mental health now is being classed in a similar wording to physical health, but that's where we need to be. But when we talk about, being covered under the Equality Act and making reasonable adjustment, usually for our members with mental health conditions, the reasonable adjustments are really minimal. Cost our employers virtually nothing. They're more driven around flexibility, manageable workload, creating an atmosphere in the workplace where our people feel comfortable to be able to come forward and talk about the mental health, come forward and be able to, say I'm struggling. And those are the kind of reasonable adjustments we've been making on the back of using the talking toolkit and the guided conversations. So, when we talk about the Equality Act, usually a lot of our employers will try to run the other way because they think, reasonable adjustments going to cost them a fortune, and, what is this person going to do in the workplace? The majority of reasonable adjustments we've made on the back of these have cost our employers absolutely nothing, apart from probably a little bit of goodwill, if I'm being brutally honest, and flexibility and understanding. So, it is vitally important for our members that they get, protections under the Equality Act. But like I would say is, for our employers, it is very, very easy to offer the reasonable adjustment. And usually that means our members then remain in work, productive, they're happy, and we're creating an atmosphere in a workplace where, there isn't a huge stigma attached to mental health. We can actually have some meaningful conversations, some open conversations, and support our members. So next slide, please, Karen.
So yeah, just to elaborate a little bit there on what Mark has said as well. The mutual benefits that Mark mentioned there, it's covered on this slide here. Taking action on stress brings business benefits. It does reduce sickness absence, and it boosts morale and actually helps improve productivity. That is the message we've had to said to the employer over the last couple of years, to get them really looking at the talking toolkit process and the benefits it brings. I mean, I think obviously Tony will talk about that again a bit later on, about the benefits it's brought in. But I think when me, Tony, Mark, Steve, many of us have been pushing for awareness around this talking toolkit, because the simple facts are, when you tackle the stress issue, presenteeism can be more likely than absenteeism. And many people actually benefit from staying in work with an action plan. It really does benefit them. Listen, sometimes absenteeism is needed, but often with the right plan, people will stay in work and feel supported, and as I mentioned before, it is so easy with this risk assessment, because all you need is a listening ear and a bit of foresight. Because me, Mark, and many people on this call will do risk assessments all the time, where we go in looking for hazards and looking for the answers. You may be looking for a fire risk assessment or an indoor or an outdoor risk assessment. When you're out there looking for the risks, the beauty about talking to people is you've got someone at the other end of the table telling you what they need. So they're already telling you the answers. So that's why a stress risk assessment is so easy. It's more about listening skills. But as I said there, taking the action on dealing with the stress does offer many mutual benefits. We do it because we want our colleagues to be supported, but we've also got to send that message to the business that it also benefits them too. So that's next slide for Mark, please, Karen.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, and this slide just outlines some of the benefits Jamie's just spoke about them, because they are mutual benefits for the employer and for us as trade unionists. But the real benefits we've found from doing these risk assessments and really pushing them in our units and hopefully pushing them out right across the region now is the fact that, for one, we do reduce stigma attached to mental health conditions in our workplace, because we're talking about it, and we're talking about it between ourselves, between our colleagues, and with our employers. And ultimately, that can only be a good thing for us all going forward. So like I said, it does encourage a positive conversation around mental health at the earliest opportunity. If we sometimes the risk assessment is done after our members have been on long-term absence, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. We're bringing our members back into the workplace supported, but if we can do it before they go absent, when we know that they're reaching a point of crisis, because we've created, you know, this atmosphere in the workplace where people feel comfortable about talking about it, we can get in there and signpost our members at the earliest opportunity. As we've touched on before, it identifies members who are covered under the Equality Act. But I think without a shadow of doubt, and we'll see this when Tony speaks a little bit later, it creates a more accepting and understanding workplace. And that is only a positive for absolutely all of us, ultimately, you know, where we've got a workplace where, you know, people can feel like they can be themselves. They can talk around the problems, whether they've been mental health or other problems. Having this guided conversations in the workplace and supporting people in the right way, the benefits for us as trade unionists are huge. So I'll just, next slide, please, Karen.
So yeah, thanks, Mark. This is just the HSE guidance on the 6 risk factors. So every single talking toolkit, or whether you call it a guided conversation or a stress risk assessment, every single one of those will concentrate on these 6 key areas based on stresses in the workplace. This is through the research that's been done out there. We've identified the 6 key areas where we need to ask questions around the demands of your job, the control over your work, the support you receive from not just for your managers, from your colleagues, relationships at work, you know, an individual's role in the organization, and how change can be best managed, because change can bring on stress as well. But these, I mean, Mark will talk about this more in the next slide, but these 6 key areas, these 6 key stresses, they never change. Whichever way you do a stress risk assessment, these 6 key areas are all focused on, and all questions will surround these 6 key areas. So it is, I mean, it is a scripted conversation, but everyone doesn't have to answer all questions in terms of the 6 key stress areas. They may say, well, I'm fine with the demands of my job and I'm getting good support, but I'm struggling with the change elements. So people may concentrate on certain aspects of these 6 key risk factors. And the talking toolkit, as I say, it is scripted, but it can be easily downloaded off the HSE site. Royal Mail use a guided conversation. So whether you're working in BT, in Parcel Force, in Royal Mail, in a call centre, you can access this talking toolkit tomorrow just by downloading it. You know, your own organisation may have a variation on it, but you can go on the HSE website after this talk and download the talking toolkit, and you'll see it for yourself. So I say Mark will talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, Karen. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, and we've touched on there. So the toolkit has 6 templates for 6 different conversations. And I think it's vital to point out that we don't have to talk about all these, to be honest. They're there as a guide, and they're there for a guide for the person who is doing the guided conversation, and also there for a guide for our member when they're, you know, talking back and talking about what their stresses are in the workplace. So all 6 don't have to be completed. You know, there may be some which are completely irrelevant to our member and are causing them no stress whatsoever. But like Jamie's touched on previously, what is perfect about this is the fact that this conversation is our member identifying and telling you basically what is causing them stress in the workplace, what is making them feel unsupported in the workplace. But also on the flip side of that, then they'll also tell us what they need for us to be able to put that right. And usually it is really, really simple. So like I said, the template is out there. It's on the HSE website, like Jamie said. It's designed in such a way where it is very simple for someone to go through, you know, because these conversations sometimes can be difficult, and not all our people, and certainly not all of our employers, feel comfortable about having a conversation around mental health. You know, I often hear that, you know, I don't know where to start, I'm not sure what to say. This takes you through it. It's like baby steps, if I'm being brutally honest, where it teases out, you know, the stresses in the workplace, but it also supports the person doing it as well. And I think that's vital, you know, because mental health, you know, it is quite a difficult subject to talk about at times. Like I said, some of our employers don't feel comfortable around having these conversations. So the template is there really to assist everyone. So like we said, there's 6 conversations there around the HSE's 6 stresses. But, you know, we could answer 3, we could answer 4, we could answer all 6. At the end of it, it will give us an idea of what the stress is in that workplace, but also then by talking to our member how we can put that right. So it is a fantastic tool, and most importantly, I think at the end of it, we can go through the template, but at the end of it, it creates that relationship then between those two people. So going forward, then that conversation is a lot simpler. It's a lot more honest, and also it doesn't have to be scripted, to be quite honest, because we've broke the ice. We can have two-way conversations around mental health in the workplace. Next slide, please, Karen.
Yes, so this slide is just basically our own flow chart that we've created. And I don't know if everyone can see it on the screen there. The actual Talking Toolkit is central to us now in terms of preventing stress. So I think it was myself, Mark and Emma Garner, it might have been Steve Jones, Carl, and also Mark Evans was involved in creating this to simplify it, because a lot of our reps want to know what they do when the first onset of stress occurs for a member. And this actual flow chart talks you through the process. What I like about this flow chart as well is it requests the duty of care shift as well. So if the manager is one of the main reasons for stress according to our member or according to the person in the workplace, we can then ask another manager to assume duty of care responsibility, because the last thing someone wants to do who's having conflict with the manager is sit down with the manager and talk about why they're having conflict. So what we try and do is identify if the manager may be an issue and then request duty of care responsibility shifts to another manager. But that is just our flow chart, our go-to flow chart. And obviously we can share this after the meeting, but it does simplify the process and identifies where you go to next when we're dealing with colleagues with acute stress. So simple slide that really, but I'll pass it on to Mark for the next one.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And look, this one's a simple slide as well, to be honest. You know, we're just talking about the positive culture which comes from the back of this. So using the template provided by the HSE and along with the flow chart, we can ensure we're having a positive conversation around mental health at the earliest opportunity. And that is vital at supporting our members in the workplace. If we can have this conversation at the earliest opportunity, yes, there's benefits from the business because ultimately it will keep people in work. But we know as trade unionists that our members are getting the right support, they're getting signposted. Like I've said on numerous occasions now, we're creating that two-way conversation where our members feel comfortable about talking around mental health. Now, myself and Jamie presented this to senior management in Royal Mail a couple of weeks ago, and it was quite worrying how many senior managers didn't know about it, to be honest, and it's quite cynical about how their ears really perked up when we went through some of the statistics we have in the Northwest, where we've completed, I think it's around 81 of these now in the last 18 months, and 81% of those people have remained in work on the back of it. Now, so Bobby, that's fantastic for our members as well, because there's a lot of studies out there what says if you're in work and it's good work and it's well managed work, it's really good for our mental health. So it's about getting that balance there, and by doing the guided conversation, it creates that balance. It creates that culture in the workplace, but it also creates that listening ear and that opportunity to make the smallest reasonable adjustments, which can make the biggest support package for our members in the workplace. So I'll just pass on to the next slide now, please, Karen.
Yeah, so this is basically, it's an image slide again. We actually use this image slide when we're training up our mental health first aiders. So our mental health first aiders who are on the call tonight, they'll be familiar with this. This is called a domino effect, and it's just really highlights that everything starts with a conversation, absolutely everything. You can see there, the first domino is a guided conversation or a talking toolkit exercise. That can then lead to occupational health support, a disability being identified, then potentially disability risk assessment processes, signposting support, both internally and externally, reasonable adjustments as well, which Mark touched on before. Certainly with mental health issues, reasonable adjustments tend to be cost-free 9 times out of 10. But the big one for us as trade unions, we get a Quality Act protection for those people. But everything has to start with a conversation. There's other organisations as well that have really bought into it. I mean, a fantastic organisation we work with called Five-A-Side Chess. You can see the image in the right-hand corner. anti-suicide awareness campaign charity, do absolutely outstanding work. They've now realised the benefits of guided conversations because of what it brings, the conversation and what it leads to. And as I mentioned before, we've got many people skilled to do these conversations. They are straightforward, they are easy. We're just going to try and promote them being done more often. But that domino slide really does capture where the first guided conversation leads to. And it's only as a prime example of that. When we bring him in a minute, he'll talk about that and what his has led to. But again, that image slide there really does capture everything about the guided conversation. It starts with a single talking toolkit exercise, and then you can get so much support coming on the back of that. So next slide for Mark, please, Karen.
Hi Tim, can I ring you back in about half an hour? All right, mate, I'll just on another call, so.
Okay. So just before I bring Tony in, just to give you basically an understanding of Tony. Tony is okay. So Tony is he's one of our mental health first aiders, works in Speak DO. Tony was supported by the guided conversation process originally. It was actually Mark Evans who first chatted to Tony. If you just put the next slide up for a sec for us, Karen. This is Tony here. The previous slide there was Tony where he's now bringing his art into the workplace. I'll let Tony explain this in a second. But Mark mentioned this before, the guided conversations or the talking toolkit exercises we've done since 2019. The retention and work rate is around 88%. That's huge, you know. And Tony mentions this himself, the guided conversation is like putting a jigsaw piece together and achieving a solid action plan. So I think on that note, I think it's only fair to bring Tony in and let him talk to you about, you know, his journey and how the guided conversation has benefited him. So I'll pass you on to Tony, if that's okay.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to start with what I call my personal depression. That is my illness, depression, which obviously causes the stresses and one thing and another that goes along with it. And I call it my personal depression because I believe, like fingerprints, everybody's experience and journey is different. And this is where this kind of touches on the guided conversation. The questions in the guided conversation will be, some of them, I'm not saying meaningless, but won't impact or won't have any need to be asked. But you have to ask these questions just to tease out the problems. I always start off with saying that I was a child of the 70s, so my formative years. We all grew up in the 70s, and we know what the 70s was like. If you had a mental illness, excuse me, though we didn't know that's what it was in them days, you didn't speak about it. Anything like that was considered a weakness. So through most of my life, I have had to hide this and keep it to myself and try cope with that, which, as anybody would know who has suffered, you will just get gradually worse and worse and worse as time goes on. Now I talk about my Damascus road to Damascus moment, which was, and I'm sure people have heard this, I was in Australia on a family holiday in Australia, and I crested a hill overlooking Bondi, which is one of the most magnificent sights anyone could ever see. And I just thought there's something wrong. There is something really radically wrong because this isn't doing what it should be doing to me. Came home, went straight to the doctors. I thought, I need to get to the bottom of this. I need to understand what is going on with me because I wasn't really involved in life. And I was diagnosed with clinical depression at that time. And obviously then you go on a journey of medication. But me being me, you go on a journey. Well, medication is very difficult as well. A very, very difficult process because there are a lot of antidepressants out there but they all have different effects on you, and they have different effects on everybody. And it took me years to find a medication that helped me. Some of them, some of them would knock me to sleep, and I would just sleep 24 hours a day. Some of them obviously cause stomach aches. Some of them cause sweats and things. A lot of problems. But eventually, I found one that works for me. Seems to be working. And then work. How do you cope in work? I mean, for years, yes, I've had problems. Yes, you have to go off sick at times, but you don't want to tell anybody what is really wrong with you. I've had a lot of migraines and a lot of bad backs, which isn't great because it simply lies half the time. But they're obviously, it's mental health problems, it's depression, but nobody knew about it. Nobody understood. Nobody talked about it. And I didn't really know what was wrong. That's the thing. I didn't know what was wrong with me. So I've been on a journey of discovery. And then we get to the guided conversation in Speak, because I did go off for a long period of time. And my manager obviously was trying to get me help, which has been good. I've got a very, very good manager, I must say. And the first time the guided conversation came up was Mark, who I can see there, Mark Evans, came in and took me through a guided conversation. But I think he knew I was in a bit of a bad place even at that time. I think I'd been off, I'd come back to work to try get back to work. Mark picked up straight away. So we basically just had a chat in the canteen, and I had a little bit of art and a few photographs and things knocking about. And Mark, we just ended up talking about that. So, and I've got to give Mark his due, and I've never told him this. He then followed up, because I did go back off sick. I did go fall apart again, and it is falling apart. There's no doubt about that. You don't understand what's going on with you. And when you're in the depths, the absolute depths of depression, you don't want to do anything. You can't even brush your teeth. And I know that sounds awful, but you do not want to do anything. You don't speak to anybody. You know, your hygiene goes up and everything goes up. It's a terrible place to be. And I will say this now because I can see there. He followed up with phone call, you know, that really helped. And that started to bring me out of it. And then I eventually went back to work, and Jamie was there to take me through another guided conversation with my manager. And this time I realized, well, this could help me.
Hello,
I
baby.
understood what this process would be.
Oh.
You know what I mean? And all I needed, all that came out with this guided conversation was I needed a bit of flexibility, because my depression can hit me out of the blue. Sometimes I can feel it coming, and as you can see, my hand's always over my shoulder on that left-hand side. And I don't know why, but that's where out of the shadow, and I know it's coming. But these days, with my journey and with my studying about it, finding things that help me, I can try that battle and try to fight it off now. I understand it a little bit better, and I understand and I know what works for me, so I can do that. Now, having said that, I can wake up in the morning and just things have fallen apart, and that's the worst place I can be. And I do have levels. I wrote a blog on it, but I simplified the levels. It's just 1, 2, and 3. If I wake up, it's 3, I'm in a really bad place and I'm in depression, and that's it. I can't do anything about it. A lot of the time, and it's, you know, I don't want to say, well, woe is me, but a lot of the time I'm in 2, which is a battle. I know it's kind of, depression is there. I can feel it. I'm in a battle. Things are quite hard. I'm a bit foggy. Now, I need a bit of time to get myself together, to sort myself out, to do either my meditation, to do things that I know that work for me. And this is where the guided conversation came in, flexibility. I can now phone my manager and say, or text my manager and say, look, I'm having one of those mornings. I'm sorry, I will be in. And I know I will be in, because I know where I'm at, how I feel, and what I can do to get myself back in. But the flexibility in the guided conversation has eased that pressure on me. I don't have that stress, and I know I can work on myself, and is quite a big deal nowadays, because that's at the end of the day, if I've started off bad and I've ended up doing that walk, I think, well, it hasn't beat me. It hasn't beat me today. Let's get on with the next thing, you know what I mean? But as I say, the guided conversation, we talked through all the questions, one thing like, not a lot of things. The job is the job as far as I'm concerned. I know what I have to do. I know what I have to achieve. It's just the flexibility. Just that little bit of flexibility in the morning to say, I need a little bit of time, I need a little bit of space. Here we go. The other thing is the art. I mean, we've got a slide there. I mean, that's not too bad, but that was a few years ago. I mean, the canteen is actually, you can hardly see anything now, but the art is a big deal for me. And I think now I've stressed, it's a de-stressor for me, because if I go into work and I feel a bit, this thingy, if I walk in that room and I can see my art, it kind of lifts me a little bit. And I've set up a quiet room, another thing, where I've done murals, and I've been allowed to spray paint on the wall, which is quite amazing. They've allowed me to do that. Set up a quiet room for everybody else to use. And the fact that I know that I'm helping everybody else helps me. And I've also obviously trained as a mental health first aider. And I've done a few of the guided conversations myself. So that all these are little building blocks for me personally. I help other people, that's great. That just gives me a little boost myself to get me into work. There's a reason for me to go to work now. It's quite a pleasant area I've got there, and I want to achieve. But it started with this guided conversation. It was a game changer for me, an absolute game changer. There's no doubt about that. Other things, I would just talk about the little thing I've seen on the thingy was nature. Oh, and working with management, that's a key thing. Sorry, I'm backtracking a little bit. Management is are key to this, really, and I think that's the next step. They have to be, they have to go through this and be shown how this can help them. You know what I mean? This could stop people sick for long-term sick and one thing and another. Or shortening the space of sick, because sometimes depression, especially my depression, it's just being supported. It's just being spoken to. I've realised that now. You see, family wasn't enough. That doesn't sound great, but family is not enough. You family all the time, but people outside who are starting to understand you and work with you and spend time and talking to you, that makes a massive difference. That really does make a difference. When you reflect back and you think of the people who have spoken to you and took time, you really appreciate that. Well, I certainly do really appreciate that. So management is a key, because they've got to understand and work. I think a future thing is to work with their mental health first aiders and understand the process and let the train people who feel confident to do these guided conversations and work with the management on the actual action plans beyond that. I think that's a key part of it. And then my last thing is nature. When I was in my worst spot, and I don't know, it was a really, really bad place. I got in the car and drove 6 hours and didn't actually know what I was doing and didn't understand where I was going. And I ended up in the Scottish Highlands. That was a game changer to me as well. I spent a week up there with no real plans, but just being out in that wilderness, in that nature, was quite unbelievable. I'd recommend anybody to go out into them mountains and them forests or something, and that will boost you. So that's me in a nutshell, really. And a nutshell is kind of where I am at times. Thank you, everybody. I'm open to
So, Carl, Karen, just to just elaborate a little bit on what Tony mentioned there, in terms of the flexibility, that's a key issue that Tony identifies there. The flexibility that's been given to him through his guided conversation and his reasonable adjustments now actually brings reliability to the business, because Tony's got that built into his disability risk assessments, and that is enshrined as a reasonable adjustment for Tony, and that is key. It really is key. The fact that Tony has that confidence knowing he's not going to be punished for being 10, 15 minutes, half an hour late even. He can just text his manager and say, you know what, I will be in, not right now, but I will be in. So that reasonable adjustment actually brings more reliability to the business, because the guided conversation on a disability risk assessment has been done. But that pitch in the canteen as well, I was hoping Jay and Graham were going to be on tonight with the reps. I know they've got other meetings, but in Speak, the benefit of Tony bringing his art into the workplace has made a massive difference to everybody else in there as well, because Speak is quite an imposing place. You can see the bars on the windows, when you go in there now, wow, it is just a fantastic environment. And, you know, even though Tony won't admit to it because he's too modest, his artwork engages people and it brings people into the canteen. There's so many people around the country now who want to work in Speak because of the way Speak looks. But that's the biggest compliment I could give Tony anyway. So, Carl, Karen, I think Tony and Mark and myself, we're happy to take any questions if anyone's got them, I think.
Jamie, how do you want the questions to come into the chat?
Well, either or, I mean, chat or, you know, raise your hand, I think, and,
Okay.
and Karen and Carl can bring people in.
Yeah.
If you put what we're going to do now, I'm going to stop recording, as we said, when we get to the question side, and Karen will do that for us.